Titan of the Tides. Part 1, Still Waters. Chapter 1, The Weight of the Crown. The Lady Trueblood cut through the Atlantic like a blade through dark silk, her hull gleaming white against the pre-dawn canvas of the ocean. Jordan Wayne stood at the stern, both massive hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee, watching the Charleston harbor lights shrink behind them like dying stars. He was a mountain of a man. 6'4", 240 pounds of disciplined muscle, his bald head catching the first pale suggestion of morning light. His skin was smooth and deep brown, flawless in the way that made people assume he was younger than his 38 years. The thin mustache above his lip was trimmed with surgical precision, the only delicate thing about him. The Titan of the Tides. That's what the fishing press had taken to calling him after he became the first black angler to hold a Class A professional tournament license in the Southeast Atlantic Division. 6 months ago, he'd walked away from Wayne Security Consulting, a firm he'd built from nothing into a $12 million operation, and dove headfirst into the only thing that had ever made him feel genuinely at peace. The water. You planning to stare at Charleston all morning, or are we actually fishing? Her voice came from the cabin doorway, smoky and sweet the way dark rum is sweet. Tanya Wayne leaned against the frame, wrapped in a short ivory robe that stopped mid-thigh, her locks piled in a loose mountain on top of her head, held back by a silk scarf. She was petite and precise, 5'2" of cocoa brown skin and careful curves. Her eyes were large and heavy-lidded, the kind of eyes that made men forget what they'd been about to say. Jordan turned and smiled. That slow, wide smile that still, after 6 years of marriage, felt like a sunrise. We're about 40 minutes from the king mackerel run, he said. Come watch. She crossed the deck and pressed herself against his side, her head barely reaching his shoulder. He wrapped one arm around her, pulling her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. This is the last trip before the Joss Classic, she murmured against his chest. I wanted it to be just us. It is just us. She looked up at him. Something moved behind her eyes, a calculation, a flicker, and was gone before he could name it. She smiled instead. Good, she said. That's exactly what I wanted. Chapter 2, The Study That Smelled of Cedar. 3 days earlier, Columbia, South Carolina. The study of Martin Trueblood's home was the kind of room that demanded honesty. Mahogany shelves lined every wall, stacked with ledgers, legal texts, and worn paperback thrillers. A single bourbon-colored lamp threw amber light across the leather chairs. Outside, a summer storm was discussing itself against the windows. Martin Trueblood sat behind his desk like a judge who had already heard enough. He was 63 years old and built like a man who had never once in his life backed down from anything. His head was shaved close, salt and pepper stubble covering his jaw, and his eyes were the dark, patient kind, the kind that read people the way other men read books. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he hadn't looked up from his ledger in 4 minutes. Andrew Martin sat across from him, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like a man in a confession booth. He was medium-built, maybe 5'11", with a wiry, compact energy about him. His complexion was almost tan, ambiguous in the way that made people ask questions he never answered. His forearms were covered in tattoos, a rolling gallery of cartoon characters that somehow made him look both playful and unpredictable. Bugs Bunny on the left wrist. A grinning Cheshire cat stretching up toward his elbow. Tweety bird on the back of his right hand, mid-flight. He was 44 years old and had been Martin Trueblood's best friend for 22 of them. Which made what he was about to say either an act of profound trust or profound stupidity. She called me Wednesday night, Andrew began, his voice low. He turned the glass of bourbon slowly in his hands. Told me Jordan's been booked for the Joss Classic. 3 weeks out on the water. She said, he stopped. Drank. She said this is the window. Martin turned a page in the ledger. She's been coming to me since she was 19, Martin. Andrew's voice dropped another register, becoming something private and raw. He traced the Cheshire cat absently, following the curve of its grin. I know how that sounds. I know what you think of me right now. But it's always been us. It was always there, even when we tried to close the door on it. Jordan is just. He exhaled. He's a mountain standing between us and the view. Martin turned another page. Once this accident happens on the water, Andrew continued carefully, watching his friend's profile, she's staging her own disappearance. She's got account set up. New papers. And I'm going to marry her, Martin. We're going to be free. We're going to finally be. Andrew. Martin's voice was a single, low note. Not loud. Not angry. Just final, the way a gavel is final. He closed the ledger. He looked at his best friend across 22 years of shared history, fishing trips and funerals, celebrations, and 2 a.m. phone calls, every milestone of 2 lives that had grown up side by side. He looked at him with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. You speak of marriage, Martin said slowly, like a man who has never once looked at the bars of a cage. Andrew opened his mouth. I'm not finished. Martin's eyes didn't waver. You've known my daughter her entire life. You watched her take her first steps in this house. You were at her high school graduation. You danced with her at her wedding. A pause that filled the room completely. And somewhere along the way, you decided that wanting her was the same thing as deserving her. Martin. The law, Martin said, has a longer reach than a fishing line, Andrew. Conspiracy. Fraud. Attempted murder. Federal maritime jurisdiction. He picked up his bourbon and took one measured sip. Jail leaves no room for a wedding altar. Andrew stared at him. The storm outside pressed against the glass. You're going to tell him, Andrew said quietly. It wasn't a question. Martin set the glass down. I'm going to do what I should have done the moment I saw the way you looked at her at that wedding. He stood, buttoning the cuff of his shirt with deliberate calm. I'm going to make a phone call. And then I'm going to ask God to have some patience with me, because what comes next is going to be very hard. Andrew stood too, slowly. His cartoon tattoos seemed garish suddenly in the amber light, childish against the gravity of the room. She loves me, he said. One last time. Like a man blowing out a candle. Martin looked at him for a long moment. She loves the idea of burning everything down, he said. That's not the same thing. I know my daughter. He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. Without turning around, don't contact her. Don't warn her. If you do, I will make sure you never see daylight from a window that isn't barred. The door swung open. The study, which had smelled of cedar and bourbon and old trust, now just smelled like the aftermath of something. Part 2, Rolling Swells. Chapter 3, The King and His Court. The king mackerel hit Jordan's line at 6:47 in the morning with the kind of violence that made Tanya grab the railing with both hands. The rod bent into a fierce arc, line screaming off the reel, and Jordan planted his feet wide on the deck, an immovable thing, a fixture of the boat itself, and began the dance. His forearms corded and flexed. The muscles in his back moved beneath his white performance shirt like a topographical map of effort. Tanya watched him from the cushioned seat at the stern. She was watching him the way you watch something beautiful that you've already decided you can't keep. She's running hard, Jordan called over his shoulder, grinning with his whole face. That grin. Lord, that grin had been her undoing once upon a time, that enormous, uncomplicated joy a man that size had no business carrying. 40 pounds, easy. Maybe 45. Show her who's boss, baby, Tanya called back, her voice bright and easy and practiced. She picked up her phone. Opened a text thread. Then closed it. Then opened it again. Not yet, she told herself. Not from the boat. Not yet. She put the phone face down on the cushion and watched her husband fight a 40-pound fish with the focused intensity of a man who had never once in his life let something slip through his hands. For one unguarded moment, she felt something complicated move through her chest. She pressed it down. She was good at that. It took Jordan 11 minutes to bring the king mackerel alongside. When it broke the surface, silver and violent and magnificent, even Tanya stood up. There she is, Jordan breathed. He looked at the fish for a long moment. Then he bent down, cradled it gently in both hands just below the waterline, angled it forward and back to push water through its gills, and let it go. Tanya frowned slightly. You're releasing it. Jordan straightened and looked at her, drying his hands on a towel. Tournament rules say I log the catch and release. Besides, he smiled. She's earned it. Fought like that? She deserves the water back. Tanya looked at the place where the fish had disappeared. Some things don't deserve to go free just because they fight hard, she said. Jordan looked at her. The smile stayed on his face but something behind his eyes sharpened, just slightly, just briefly, and then relaxed again. Hungry, he said. I'll make breakfast. Chapter 4, The Combing Out. The cabin of the Lady Trueblood was small and warm and smelled of cedar oil and sea salt. Tanya sat before the narrow mirror above the vanity table, a wide-toothed comb in her hand, and began to take her locks apart. It was slow, deliberate work. Each lock had to be unwound gently from the root, years of growth, years of intention, carefully undone. She had started them at 21, the year she married Jordan. People always assumed that meant something sentimental. It didn't. She'd started them because Andrew told her once, offhandedly, that he loved natural hair. She had been 21 and foolish and in love with a man she was not marrying, and so she'd grown locks as a private monument to a private feeling, and worn them for 6 years on the head of another man's wife. Now she was taking them down. The first one came loose and she set it on the table. Then the next. And the next. As the locks fell, something else fell with them, some constructed version of herself. Mrs. Wayne. The fishing widow. The loyal supporter. The woman in the stands at every tournament, smiling for the cameras, wearing Wayne's team colors like a flag of ownership. Done. In the mirror, she watched her hair begin to spread and cloud around her face, freed from its shape. She looked younger. She looked like someone else. She looked like the 19-year-old who had sat on the edge of Andrew Martin's bed and decided, with the clear-eyed certainty of youth, that this was the man she was supposed to build a life with. 20 years of wrong turns later, she was finally correcting course. She opened her waterproof bag and checked the contents methodically. 2 prepaid phones, both clean. A USB drive containing the account access for the Joss Harrison offshore accounts, 3 years of careful, patient siphoning from Wayne Security Consulting's dormant vendor payment systems. $214,000, give or take. Enough to begin. New ID documents, courtesy of a contact Andrew had sourced through channels she didn't ask about. And a folded piece of paper with a marina address in the Outer Banks, where Andrew would be waiting in a rented slip under the name K. Johnson. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She thought about Jordan on the deck, releasing that fish. She's earned it. She deserves the water back. You have no idea what you've earned, she said quietly to his absence. She picked up the comb and kept working. Chapter 5, The Call Between Men. The satellite phone in Jordan's gear bag had a number programmed into it that wasn't in any contact list. He'd put it there 3 weeks ago, the same night Martin Trueblood had called him from a pay phone, an actual pay phone, which told Jordan everything he needed to know about how seriously the old man was taking this. He waited until Tanya was in the cabin. Then he moved to the bow, into the wind, and made the call. It rang once. Wayne. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. Agent Dana Mackle, Maritime Crimes Division, FBI Field Office in Raleigh. She was 36, sharp as a gaff hook, and had been building a case for 11 days based on what Jordan had given her. We're on the water, Jordan said quietly, his back to the cabin windows. She brought the bag. The one I told you about. You confirmed the offshore accounts? Martin confirmed it. He has the routing documentation. The name is Joss Harrison, JOSS. His people traced it back to a vendor account from my old firm that should have been closed in 2022. A pause. Keys clicking. Andrew Martin flew into Wilmington this morning, Mackle said. We have him on camera at a rental marina. He's using the name K. Johnson. Another pause. Jordan. The timeline she's working is tight. If she's combing out the locks. She started 20 minutes ago. Silence. Then she's closer than we thought, Mackle said carefully. You need to maintain. Don't tip her. Don't give her any reason to accelerate. I've been maintaining for 3 weeks, Jordan said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite bitterness, more like the particular exhaustion of a man who has been performing normalcy in the face of something that is not normal at all. I can maintain. We have a Coast Guard asset positioned 8 miles northeast. They'll close on my signal. A brief pause that might have been something human. You doing okay? Jordan looked out at the Atlantic. It was enormous and blue and indifferent, the way the truth is sometimes indifferent, it just sits there, waiting for you to be ready to look at it. I loved her, he said. I know, Mackle said. I need you to know that. Because when this is over, people are going to want to make it into something else. A story about a scorned man, or a lucky catch, or whatever headline they put on it. He paused. I loved her. I just loved staying alive more. Copy that, Mackle said quietly. We'll be ready. Jordan ended the call. Stood in the bow for another moment, the wind pushing against his broad chest like it was trying to have an argument with him. Then he went below to make his wife breakfast. Part 3, The Chop. Chapter 6, Breakfast for 2. The galley was barely big enough for one person to cook in, which meant Tanya sat on the narrow bench at the table and watched Jordan fill the space entirely, moving around the small kitchen with a surprising lightness for a man his size. Her hair was half combed out now, a soft, loose cloud that fell past her shoulders. She'd changed into a thin sundress, pale yellow. No makeup yet. She looked, Jordan thought, carefully, privately, unbearably beautiful. He cracked eggs into a pan. You changed your hair, he said. Not accusatory. Just observational. The way he said most things. She touched it self-consciously. Thinking about something new. The locks were getting heavy. I always liked them. I know. She smiled. That's sort of why I'm taking them out. The egg sizzled. Jordan said nothing for a moment, focusing on the pan. Something you want to tell me, Tanya? The question landed in the small space between them. She looked at the back of his head, that smooth, brown crown, the breadth of his shoulders. Like what? She said lightly. I don't know. He plated the eggs, turned around, set the plate in front of her. Their eyes met across the narrow table. His were steady and dark and unreadable, the way deep water is unreadable. You've been quiet. I'm always quiet on the water. You know that about me. You're a different kind of quiet lately. He sat across from her, filling the bench entirely, forearms resting on the table. A planning kind of quiet. She held his gaze. 20 years of lying to herself had made her a very good liar to other people. I'm planning a nap, she said. After breakfast. He smiled slowly. She felt something under her ribs that she didn't have a name for anymore. Eat your eggs, he said. Chapter 7, What the Water Knows. An hour after breakfast, the Lady Trueblood was anchored in a drift pattern 2 miles offshore, and the sun was high and golden and extravagant. Tanya lay on the padded sun deck in a black bikini, eyes closed behind dark glasses, the Atlantic rocking her with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. She could hear Jordan somewhere toward the stern, the soft whir of a reel, the creak of the fighting chair, the occasional low murmur as he talked to the fish the way fishermen do, carrying on a private conversation with something that couldn't respond. She slid one hand under the sun towel and found the prepaid phone by feel. In position. When? She waited. The phone buzzed once. Tomorrow night. Storm window. You know what to do. She deleted the thread. Rolled onto her stomach. Let the sun press down on her back like a warm hand. She thought about Andrew. Andrew, who had a laugh like a car radio turned up too loud, who had never once in his life taken anything seriously except her. Andrew, with his ridiculous cartoons tattooed up his arms, who had explained each one to her over the course of years, the Cheshire Cat because you never know if I'm really smiling or really warning you, baby, the Tweety Bird because I look harmless but I always win in the end, and who had kissed her in his kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon 11 months ago and said, very quietly, against her mouth, I'm done waiting. You hear me? I'm done. She had told herself she was doing this for love. She was beginning to understand, in the way that comes too late to be useful, that love and obsession live in the same neighborhood and are very hard to tell apart in the dark. But she was too far down the road to turn around now. The money was moved. The papers were done. The plan was in motion. She pressed her face into the towel. Tomorrow night. Chapter 8, The Father's Shore. That same afternoon, Martin Trueblood's home. Martin sat on his back porch with a glass of sweet tea he hadn't touched and a phone he'd been staring at for 20 minutes. He was thinking about the day Tanya was born. February, ice on the roads, her mother squeezing his hand until his knuckles cracked. The way the nurse had put this tiny, furious, cocoa-brown person in his arms and Tanya had stopped crying, just immediately stopped, like she'd been waiting for exactly this, and looked at him with those enormous dark eyes. He had been, in that moment, completely and permanently defeated. He was her father. He would always be her father. That didn't change. That couldn't change. But. He picked up the phone and called Jordan. She's moving tomorrow night, Martin said. Andrew confirmed the storm window to one of my contacts. I didn't want to be right about this, son. I need you to know that. Jordan's voice was steady on the other end. I know, Martin. She's my blood. The old man's voice roughened slightly at the edges, like wood grain under pressure. But you're a man of honor. I watched you build something from nothing. I watched you stand at that altar and mean every word. A pause. I won't let them bury you in the ocean you worked so hard to conquer. You're a good man, Jordan said. I'm a father who failed somewhere I didn't see, Martin replied. That's a different thing. He set the sweet tea down. Agent Mackle has my full statement and Andrew's timeline. Whatever Tanya needs, whatever the law requires, I won't obstruct it. His voice dropped to something very quiet. But when this is over, Jordan. When the courts are done and the cameras are gone. I'd like to sit across from you and have a real conversation. About what? About where I missed her. A long pause. The afternoon insects hummed in the yard. Because somewhere I missed her. And a man my age ought to understand his failures before God runs out of time to let him. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Yes sir, he said. I'll sit with you. Martin nodded to himself. Tomorrow night, he said again. Be ready. Part 4, The Storm. Chapter 9, The Last Evening. The sun went down over the Atlantic like something magnificent and wasteful, painting the water in colors that had no names. Jordan grilled mahi-mahi on the small deck grill, and Tanya opened a bottle of white wine, and for a few hours the Lady Trueblood was just a boat and they were just two people watching the sky. It was almost unbearable, Jordan thought. Not because it was bad. Because it wasn't. Because this, exactly this, was what he had wanted when he walked away from the security firm and picked up a fishing rod. This boat, this water, this woman, this evening. He had built toward this specific piece for years and it was sitting right in front of him, close enough to touch, and it was also completely not real. Pour me some more of that, he said, nodding at the wine. Tanya leaned over and filled his glass. Her hair, fully combed out now, moved around her face in the evening breeze. She looked soft and open and nothing like someone who had a plan. She was extraordinary, he thought. Terrifyingly, genuinely extraordinary. What are you thinking about? She asked. The tournament, he said. The Jaws Classic field is strong this year. Harrison's competing. Mackle's competing. That kid out of Georgia, Mason, he's got serious skill. You'll beat them, she said simply. You always say that. You always do. She drew her knees up to her chest, curling small against the bench, her wine glass held loosely. You're the best fisherman out here, Jordan. You've always been the best at whatever you decided to be the best at. He looked at her. That's true, he said quietly. Something flickered in her expression. Including reading people, he added. The flicker again. There and gone. Is that a fishing metaphor? She said lightly. It's just a fact. He took a long drink of wine. Set the glass down. Looked out at the darkening water. I've been thinking about what makes someone go wrong, he said. In the security business, you spend a lot of time with that question. People who do bad things aren't usually evil in the way movies make it look. Usually they're just committed to a version of themselves that requires a certain outcome, and everything that stands in the way of that outcome starts to look like an obstacle. Tanya was very still. Interesting theory, she said. It's not a theory. It's a pattern. He turned to look at her directly. Those steady, deep eyes. Obstacles don't have feelings in that kind of thinking. They're just things to be removed. The evening settled around them, the water making small sounds against the hull. You're tired, Tanya said. Her voice was perfectly even. Fishing does that. I sleep great on the water, actually. He smiled slowly. Always have. He stood, collected the plates, took them below. Tanya sat alone on the deck for a long moment, staring at nothing, her wine going warm in her hand. He knows something, said a voice somewhere in the back of her mind. He can't, said another. He knows something. She pressed her fingers hard against the side of her glass and made herself breathe. Tomorrow. Just make it to tomorrow. Chapter 10, 3 a.m. The storm that moved through at 3 a.m. was not dramatic. It was patient, the kind of storm that doesn't announce itself, just gradually converts the world into wet darkness. Jordan lay in the forward berth with his eyes open, listening to the rain on the hull. He heard Tanya ease out of the berth at 3:17. Her weight leaving the mattress was a particular shift he had memorized without meaning to, the way you memorize all the sounds of someone you have shared a bed with for years. He heard her cross to the head. The door close. Open. Her feet crossed the cabin. Then he heard something he hadn't heard before, the sound of the waterproof bag being unzipped. He was on his feet. Not fast, not dramatic, just upright, the way a man who used to run a security firm gets upright when something confirms a suspicion. He pulled on a shirt and moved to the cabin door and stood there in the dark. Through the thin door he heard her breathing. He heard the rustle of the documents. He heard her whisper something, one word, one name, under her breath, so quiet it was nearly below hearing. Andrew. Jordan pressed his back against the wall beside the door and closed his eyes. He gave himself exactly 10 seconds. 10 seconds to be a husband in pain and not an operator running an extraction. 10 seconds for the part of him that had stood at an altar and meant every word. Then he opened his eyes. He took out the satellite phone and sent Agent Mackle one word. Now. Chapter 11, The Signal. The Coast Guard cutter King's Harrison came out of the storm with its lights off, running dark, and Tanya didn't see it until it was 200 yards away. She was standing at the stern in a rain jacket, the waterproof bag over her shoulder, watching the water, waiting for the lights of Andrew's rented slip to appear on the horizon, the signal they'd arranged. 3 blinks, then 2. The radio on the deck crackled. Jordan's voice came from behind her. Coast Guard is going to want to come aboard, he said. She spun around. He was standing in the cabin doorway, massive and still, the rain moving around him. He had the satellite phone in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, and he looked at her with an expression that was not anger and not hurt but something quieter and more final than both, the expression of a man who has already done the grieving and is now just managing the logistics. Jordan. They have the Joss Harrison account documentation, he said. Martin gave it to them. The routing numbers, the withdrawal timeline, all of it. He took a sip of coffee. They have Andrew in the Outer Banks Marina. He was picked up 40 minutes ago. The rain came down between them. Tanya stared at him. Something was happening in her face, the architecture of the plan collapsing, calculation giving way to something rawer and less controlled. My father, she said. Barely audible. Made his choice. Jordan held her gaze. The same one I made. The same one you made. The Coast Guard cutter was close now, its radio alive with professional voices. I loved you, she said. And for the first time in years, it was simply true, not a tool, not a performance, not a thing deployed in service of something else. Just true and terrible and too late. Jordan looked at her for a long time. I know you did, he said. Part of you. The rest of you wanted something I couldn't compete with. He set the thermos down. I tried. You should know that. I tried to be enough. Agent Mackle's voice came through the satellite phone. Wayne. We're ready to come aboard. Jordan looked at his wife. At this small, extraordinary, ruined woman standing in the rain with a bag full of someone else's future and her own past scattered in strands across the cabin floor. Tanya Wayne, he said, you have the right to remain silent. He stepped aside. And the agents came aboard. Epilogue, after the water. The Jaws Classic, 4 weeks later. The morning of the tournament, Martin Trueblood drove 4 hours from Columbia to Beaufort and found Jordan at the dock at 5 a.m., rigging lines in the dark. The old man stood on the dock for a moment, watching. Then he stepped aboard without asking permission, the way a man steps into a space where he has earned the right to stand. Jordan looked up. Said nothing. Handed him a coffee from the thermos. They stood side by side in the pre-dawn dark, 2 large men watching the Atlantic prepare itself for day. How is she? Jordan asked. Counsel says she'll take the plea, Martin said. Reduced on the fraud. The attempted charges. He paused. She'll do time, Jordan. I know. She's still my daughter. I know that too. Martin wrapped both hands around the thermos cup. Looked out at the water. I keep going back to a Tuesday when she was about 7 years old. She found a bird with a broken wing in the backyard. She spent 3 days trying to fix it. Wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat much. Just this little girl bent over this bird with tape and a popsicle stick. He paused. Bird died on the 3rd day. She cried until she was sick. Another pause. I thought that meant she had a big heart. I thought that meant she cared about broken things. It did mean that, Jordan said. It still means that. Martin looked at him. She just decided at some point, Jordan continued, that she was going to be the one who decided which broken things deserved fixing. He looked out at the horizon, where the first pale gray was beginning. That's a hard road. Being the one who decides. Martin was quiet for a long time. Then, you're going to win today. Probably, Jordan said. Definitely, Martin said, and there was something in his voice that was grief and love and the specific exhaustion of a good man who has survived something very hard. You're the best one out here. You've always been the best one out here. Jordan looked at him. Thought about Tanya saying those same words on a deck in the rain, and how the words meant something different coming from this man, because this man had paid a price for them. Thank you for the call, Martin. Thank you for answering it. The sun broke the horizon. The tournament began. And Jordan Wayne, the titan of the tides, bald and smooth-skinned and 240 pounds of quiet, undefeated purpose, pointed the Lady Trueblood toward open water, and went to do what he did best. The end. Titan of the tides, a story about the things we build, the things we lose, and the deep, undefeated truth that the water always knows.